Welcome to YourTown television program. I'm your host, Paula Joy MacNab. And oh boy, here we go for another program with, and I use the word a lot because I mean it a lot, an amazing man whom I've had the privilege to know for probably 5 or 6 years and who has influenced my life in a very positive way. And I know that you will gain a lot from listening to him. This is Mr. Philip Daunt. He is an attorney, a mediator, a transformational attorney, and one might wonder, what the heck is that? And Philip is here to tell us. Welcome to the program, Philip.
Thank you, Paula. I really appreciate you inviting me to come.
Oh, I'm delighted, and I'm very sincere and I was sharing with you earlier, I was speaking about your work yesterday to someone and what a difference it makes. And I'm going to dive right in with this quote, and forgive me for reading, certainly, but it's, Mr. Daunt believes that conflict is largely the result of unmet expectations, and unmet expectations are largely the result of erroneous assumptions. My question is, you are an attorney. Often, I'll speak for my own biases, I think that attorneys are not quite as bent on solving problems as doing some billable hours. There you go. That's my bias.
Okay, good. Well, and I think that that's a valid assessment
well,
in many in many cases.
Yeah.
I think the challenge we have as attorneys is historically we've been trained to be advocates.
Yes.
And when you're an advocate, there is a tendency to pour gasoline on the fire.
Yes, perfectly said. Thank you.
And the challenge is that as advocates, sometimes we overlook what I believe are our fiduciary duties to our clients, which a lawyer has a fiduciary duty to his or her client, and that means we're supposed to put our client's interests before our own. Mm-hmm. And if we can reach an early, peaceful resolution of a conflict, I believe that's in the client's best interest, rather than dragging conflict through the courts. Right. So the challenge we have is that the predominant paradigm when one deals with conflict is you hire a lawyer, and the lawyer is going to be your gladiator for you and mm-hmm. go to battle for you. Mm-hmm. But human beings are structured in a way where we really don't like being wrong, and we have a history of being right and making other people wrong. And the challenge when you choose to be right and make other people wrong is they tend to take on the same manner of being, and they choose to be right and make you wrong, and you get into this negative feedback loop. And, mm-hmm. I think that for us as human beings, well, me specifically as an attorney, I've been practicing law now since 1980, so it's been 38 years at this point. Uh-huh. And I've been a mediator for 25 years. And when I started practicing law, I thought of myself as an advocate, have law degree, will travel. Uh-huh. And I think as I matured in my practice, I reached the conclusion that what lawyers really are is we are professional conflict managers. Mm-hmm. That conflict is an inevitable part of being human, but how we engage in conflict and how we resolve conflict, that's a choice. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the current predominant paradigm of going to war is a fairly destructive choice. Mm-hmm. There are alternatives.
I agree.
And so I came to the conclusion that if I'm going to spend my career as a professional conflict manager, perhaps it would be my responsibility to examine just what conflict is.
Yes.
Which gets back to the quote you talked about.
Right.
In most instances, if you're dealing with people who have a good faith dispute, a good faith conflict, mm-hmm. it results from unmet expectations.
Right.
They entered into an agreement or entered into a relationship with the expectation that something would occur, and when that did not occur, that resulted in an emotional response.
Yes.
And the emotional response typically is one of resentment,
yes.
which leads to resistance,
right.
which leads to the need for revenge. I call it the 3 R's.
Right.
Resentment, resistant, revenge.
Yes.
And I have found that when one acts from those 3 R's, the person that one focuses that negative energy on responds in kind, and you get into this negative feedback loop.
Yes.
It reverberates back and forth, and solutions are not on the table. So when I started thinking about what it was to actually be in conflict, the idea of unmet expectations resulting from erroneous assumptions. You assumed something would happen and it didn't happen. That was the result actually of miscommunication, misunderstandings that arose from miscommunication. Well, if you can focus on the communication, see, okay, how did we get sideways on this? When I said X, you heard Y. How did that happen? When you said Y, I heard Z. How did that happen? You focus on the communication instead of the conflict, you can look for solutions. And you can look for positive solutions to the problem. So I proposed, as an alternative to the 3 R's, resentment, resistance, and revenge, why don't we substitute empathy, kindness, and gratitude? They're just words. But just by repeating those words, choosing to feel empathy for the other person's position, just choosing to be kind to that person, choosing to be grateful for the opportunity to look for ways to grow as a result of the conflict, the approach to conflict changes. Instead of approaching conflict with fear, you can approach conflict with excitement. There's a lesson to be learned here. This unmet expectation saying, okay, I made some assumptions that obviously were not true, otherwise I wouldn't have this unmet expectation. How did I get there? What can I do next time to not go down that same road? It's fun.
Well, it is fun. And Philip, and what I'm hearing you say is that in this, there's a choice going into this.
Absolutely. It's all about choice. And I believe that we can choose to be responsible for our lives, or we can choose to be victims. And when we choose to be victims, we give power over our lives to other people. And when we choose to be victims, we slide into once again into the 3 R's.
So how does, excuse me for interrupting you, how does one, say faced with a difficult situation, a divorce or a real estate dispute. We'll talk real estate because that's my field. Why not? And I know you're an expert in it. So we go into a negotiation expecting the best. And when things go south, when people are in the emotional, fear, which is what I think happens, I'm afraid I'm not going to get what I wanted, how do you get them out of that victim mentality, the victim fighting for their survival, quote, back to that space of empathy and kindness and listening?
By managing their expectations.
So how does one manage one's, and I'm asking this for myself.
Well, I have a tool I developed about 15 years ago that I call a simple question in the game of 3 rules. And I've been teaching this now to hundreds of clients over the last decade and a half. And typically when a client comes in to see me, they come in to see me because they have a problem. Something's not right. And I do an intake interview. And during the intake interview, at some point in time, the client's going to complain about something not being fair. It's just not right, whatever. And that's my access point. I tend to stop them at that point and say to them, well, I have this tool. I use it with most of my clients. I call it a simple question in the game of 3 rules. Would you be interested in learning about it? And they typically say yes. And so I ask them the question. And the question is, do you believe you can change the past? And when they inevitably, eventually say no, and sometimes it takes some clients longer than others to acknowledge that they don't have a time machine, they can't change the past, I congratulate them and I say, that's great, that means you qualify to play the game. And the reason I call it the game of 3 rules is because it has 3 rules. Rule number 1, you choose to believe that the past is perfect. For only one reason. You can't change it. Because if it weren't perfect, you'd want to change it, and wanting to do something you cannot do will just drive you crazy. And what that means, for purposes of playing this game, is every horrible thing that's ever happened to you in your entire life is absolutely perfect. It's liberating.
Wow. That's powerful.
Rule number 2, you choose to believe. Once again, I'm not telling them that it's true. I'm asking them to believe, for purposes of playing this game, that everyone always does the best he or she possibly can, given the resources they believe are available to them. Everyone. I use as examples Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Attila the Hun, whoever's making their life miserable, and they themselves. They're doing the best they can. Now, the reason for the first rule, in my opinion, is so people stop wasting their energy in what I call the shoulda, woulda, coulda conversation. If the past is perfect, no reason for that conversation at all. The reason for the second rule, well, think about it. If somebody did something to harm you, but when they did what they did, they were doing the best they possibly could. I suggest that the only legitimate response you can have toward that person is one of compassion.
Yes.
And if you made a horrible mistake, and as a result of that mistake, you either hurt yourself or someone else, but when you made that mistake, you were doing the best you could, you should feel compassion toward yourself.
Yes.
So the second rule, you get to give up the shaming and blaming. No more shame and no more blame, which leads us to the last rule. And the last rule is you choose to believe, once again, that you alone are 100% responsible for your current situation and for changing it if you choose to do so. Not 50%, not 95%, but 100%. That's the whole game. The past is perfect, everyone does the best they can, and I'm 100% responsible. And then I invite my clients to take whatever legal problem they have and bring it into the game and feel how it shifts. Because when you're taking 100% responsible for your current situation, and when you're not blaming anyone, not yourself, not anyone else, and you're not regretting the past, but you're focusing on what's in front of you, solutions become available. And you start looking towards solutions rather than trying to blame people for what went wrong. So in the real estate context, for example, if the client says that they wanted to buy this house, but they didn't know that there was a problem with the house. Well, there's a problem with the house. And there are going to be different ways of dealing with it, and they get to, they need to take they don't need to do anything. I tend not to use the N word. But it's empowering for them to take responsibility to simply say, okay, this is what is, these are the cards we're dealt with, what are my alternative solutions to this problem as I sit today?
Yes.
It's empowering. Yes. Once again, taking responsibility versus being a victim. The challenges in our society is many people are taught that victimhood is all there is. They don't understand that they have a choice of simply claiming responsibility over their lives. And with the more responsibility you take, the more power you have.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So could you give an example, obviously no names involved, but run us through a scenario of a situation that you've been through that. Okay.
Certainly. I recently conducted a mediation. It was in a commercial context. Two businesses that were, one was above the other. And there were issues with noise. There were issues with things falling down through the cracks in the floor into the ceiling of the other business. And the owners of the two businesses had reached the point where they just weren't even able to communicate with each other. The tension was so great that all they could do was scream at each other. And the landlord who owned the building approached me and asked me if I could help.
Yes.
And so I explained the game of three rules to the landlord. The landlord thought, that's an interesting alternative. Invited the downstairs tenant to come visit me. I explained the game of three rules to the downstairs tenant. And then we conducted a mediation session based upon the game. And the floodgates opened. All of a sudden, these people were working together again.
Talk to us about that if you can. Again, respecting anonymity. What kind of shift? I mean, intellectually, I get this, but on a real core level, if I'm really holding my position that I'm right.
If you're really holding your position that you're right, then you have created a story that isn't necessarily true, but you believe it to be true. And the challenge with beliefs is they're not true, except to the people who believe them.
Yes.
So the key for the game is to shift your beliefs, to start to question your beliefs. When you say you did that on purpose, you know that you're lying, because there's no way that I can know what you're thinking when you do something.
Yes.
So if we can separate the events in our lives from our stories about the events in our lives, then we can start focusing on shifting the stories. I have a friend who once told me that it's never too late to have a happy childhood.
I love that quote.
And I just love it, because the idea is all that we as adults have of our childhood is our story about our childhood.
Sure.
And so if we had a miserable childhood, it's because we've created a miserable story.
That's right.
We are free as human beings to choose a new story.
Right.
And so if you choose to believe that your neighbor is a horrible person, your neighbor will be a horrible person until you choose to believe that he or she is not. And it's all a question about taking responsibilities for the beliefs that we choose to have in our lives.
Right.
I think the challenge we have as human beings is we are meaning-making machines.
Say that again.
We are meaning-making machines.
Yes.
We make meaning out of everything.
Everything.
But we're the ones who create that meaning.
Exactly.
Events are just events. The events I have another expression I love, that is, life has no meaning other than the meaning that we give to it.
Absolutely true.
So if you get that you are giving whatever meaning to your life that you have,
Mm-hmm.
you can give it a different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
If someone says something to you, you can give whatever they say a positive meaning or a negative meaning. You have control over that.
So this would lead me to think that in the beginning of a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or it's a business relationship or any relationship, there could be some effective tools for communicating.
Absolutely.
And I was speaking to someone again about this of, you know, what are, and again in real estate, because it's very prevalent in this area, and setting up expectations. And, you know, I think if I can say to you at the very beginning, dear Mr. Client, what are your expectations of this outcome? What would a positive outcome look like to you? Well, I may be thinking he wants, 10 phone calls a day, God forbid, and, emails every 5 minutes, and he may be Paula, I want to hear from you once a week. That's what I want.
Clear communication.
When we do it at the beginning, it seems to me a very empowering opportunity to alter the outcome.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the earlier you establish clear lines of communication, the better off you are. And you always have the opportunity to reopen the lines of communication.
Yes.
So if you look at a conflict as an invitation to re-examine your unmet expectations, re-examine your erroneous assumptions, re-examine your misunderstandings, get back to the point of communication, say, oh, wow, we didn't really communicate clearly on this issue. Let's do so now.
Right.
Let's get clear now as to what your expectations are.
So there's a real point, hopefully early in the conflict, that we can look in ourselves and look at the conflict and say, stop. Instead of continuing to pour gasoline on the fire, which I love that analogy, which we do. We go to bat for our clients and being very destructive. But there's a point we can stop, I'm hearing you say, and reevaluate the position that we've taken. We've got just another minute to wrap this. I'd love to keep talking.
If you simply take the position that there are a multitude of reasons why someone does something, and you choose to believe that the reason that they have is a positive one as opposed to a negative one, then you're in a space where you can say, okay, I understand that when you said X, you thought Y, and I heard Z. Yep. This is what we have right now, and this is what either works for me or doesn't work for me. Can we come up with a solution that works for both of us?
Absolutely brilliant. Philip, thank you so much for being with us today. What a pleasure. There's so much more I want to hear and share. You've been watching YourTown television program. I'm your host, Paula Joy MacNab. Join us again. Thank you.